Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm your host tonight, Mike Reed, and this evening we're here with Gary Galles. Gary is a professor at Pepperdine University, and he's also a prolific Liberty author. You see him all around the Liberty space, especially the Mises blog. The new Mises blog has a lot of Gary Galles. He's also the author of two books that are exclusive to Liberty.me members: Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies, and the new one, Lines of Liberty, which is, as far as I know, the biggest, the best book of libertarian quotations known to man. Gary, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I thank you for those kind words. And all the 108,000 words or so of the book, thank you too for those.
Yeah, it's not a lightweight, that book. But before we jump into it, just tell me, did you just return from a lengthy vacation in which you didn't do any writing?
Well, yes and no. Gone for 2 weeks. I had written things before we left and sent them off to do stuff. So, for instance, tomorrow I have something in the San Francisco Chronicle.
Oh, nice.
And I thought, sometimes I am most productive when I can't write, because then ideas sit there and cogitate. So I got stuff to do. I also took a copy of a book that I think maybe 45 years ago I'd read as a kid, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Wow, great one.
A very libertarian book, and I reread it. And in there, I was working on an article about watch your privileges.
Mm.
And I found a quote in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress that is perfect for that article. So yes, I enjoyed that stuff. I tend to read a lot of science fiction. I avoid dystopian stuff because I can live in that world. But yeah, so I thought a little bit, didn't write much.
Yeah, well, but even when you're supposed to be on vacation, the brain is still going on that stuff.
Well, my daughter was just talking to me earlier today, and she said, "Well, Dad, you know, when you're on vacation, you're really working. Let's be honest."
Yeah.
But it's an avocation. It's not really work.
Yeah.
You know, I've learned so much stuff in what became Lines of Liberty. It's a great personal education device to go through that.
Right.
Of course, it does take a decade and a half, but you know, detail.
So this is a collection of quotations. There are what's the number? 61 different authors inside of it.
I just counted. We're 69.
69 different authors inside of it, and each one has dozens of different quotations. I don't know how many that adds up to in the whole thing, but you gotta be pushing 1,000 quotes by the end of the book.
Oh, 1,000. I'd probably say there's probably 5, 6, 7,000 quotes all told.
Just amazing. Just amazing.
And you know, it's something I'm not sure I would recommend for anybody to go through the process. This was something that I started to get interested in, and slowly over time, as I'm doing other things, I'm working on this stuff, and I'd read this author and they connect to one another, and some of them are interesting. You know, when I started, I mean, I might tell you the story about how I got started. One of the most obvious people to look at was Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
So coming up on the 4th of July, it's a natural time, but he also has my birthday. So the advantage I have over him is I'm 210 years younger and alive. But then, you know, it turns out I come across in reading that, Richard Henry Lee criticized him for plagiarism from Locke in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. So I start looking into Richard Henry Lee, and so the Richard Henry Lee's in there, and Richard Henry Lee is saying he stole it from Lord Acton.
Wow.
You start reading Lord Acton, and you sort of, this is a pretty promiscuous group here. You know, these people will tie this, and so it's like my education as I slowly would read these things with an eye towards this stuff. So I've really gained a lot from going through this, from people you would have thought of to people I had never heard of before I started this stuff.
Yeah, and there's that range in there. I mean, Ayn Rand is in there, Thomas Jefferson, the other famous founders, but then there's other lesser-known figures.
Yeah, well, the one that has struck me the most, and in fact, I believe is the longest chapter in the book, is the first one about somebody, is from something called Cato's Letters. It was written in England by this pair of people, and it was the leading libertarian voice in the English-speaking world before the revolution. There's a, for instance, the Liberty Fund has a 2-volume collection. Wow. I mean, it's like 1,200 pages long. And it was great. I even found quotes that I see things from the founding fathers that people will speak well of. They're kind of paraphrasing what went before. So, you know, I mean, I find Cato's letters was really an impressive thing. Right. In fact, I was going to mention about the quote that led me to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I mean, the story of how this book really started. I was writing an article in 1999, so this goes back to there, and I was looking to use a quote from George Washington, right? Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. I don't remember exactly. Like fire, it is a dangerous service and a fearful master. That's actually almost a paraphrase of something Trenchard and Gordon said, you know, 80 years earlier.
Wow. But we give the later guy who was just paraphrasing, give him all the credit.
Because nobody reads. I mean, this is great stuff. In fact, in getting ready for this, I collected, I don't know, a dozen of the things, short, pithy things they said that, you know, people were interested in what they had to say. It's worth reading. There's even a financial bubble in the writings. The South bubble, it was going on at the time. But anyway, the George Washington thing, I tried to look it up. I didn't remember the quote exactly. So I went to my quotation books. You know, there's Bartlett's, there's, you know, these quotation books.
Right.
I couldn't find it. Wasn't there. So I'm going, well, I want to use this quote. It's perfect, but I don't remember it exactly. So what I did was fun. I used to write so many articles for the Orange County Register.
Right.
You know, Freedom newspapers is a pretty good match for me. That this was before everything's online.
Mm-hmm.
They would send me tear sheets every day of their op-ed and editorial pages, right? So I would have copies and I could see what they were writing about. And in a little blurb, Percy Hoyles, the publisher of the Orange County Register, the original publisher, had a collection of quotes. And so he had this little bitty quote somewhere in that. And every once in a while, one that would inspire me, I would cut out and put it in my top desk drawer. So I've been doing that for years. So I thought, got to be in there, you know? So I went through the Superfund site that is my desk. And I made this little pile of all the things that I had stuck in my drawer over the years. I mean, it was a couple hundred of these little pieces of paper I cut out, ranging in color from, you know, pretty new newsprint to the orangish brown that must be 5 years old. And in that pile were 5 copies of the George Washington quote that I had saved at different times.
And do you think at each time you had thought, oh, this is a great one, I better store it? Like,
I put it in there. I hadn't remembered, because, you know, there's enough time in between. I hadn't remembered that I had that one. So anyway, I had this pile of quotes. And I thought, I wonder how many of these great quotes about liberty are not in these books. Well, I actually put together an article for the Orange County Register in March of '99 that was made up of these, what I call orphans. These articles, these quotes I thought were great with regard to liberty and weren't in any of the quotation books I had. So that was the initial, you know, trigger. And then I got interested in this. And I think for the 4th of July, I did one about various founding fathers, you know, one from each. Even got that one published in the LA Times when they weren't quite so reflexively left-wing. Haven't had one in the Times for a while. But so I mean, that's what got me started. Right, I found this interesting. I was learning stuff, and so I, you know, at the time I mentioned I started it with Thomas Jefferson because there was a natural connection there, and it would wind here and there, and I would read stuff, and so I was working on these things, and I would get the books, and I would read what I had. I'd go find more stuff. I'd put things together. Jeff Tucker was a great, supporter in that. A lot of those ended up at the Mises Daily articles and so forth over the years. So I mean, I was getting some positive feedback as we go.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but I was copy editing the Mises Daily at that time, and so I remember these Gary Galley's quotations coming in.
Well, I'm glad I was giving you work back then. Isn't that what a politician would say? I was creating jobs. If I would have written even more words, would you have earned more? Is that what you're saying?
With more typos.
Yeah.
That was the problem, Gary. You didn't have enough typos for me.
Okay. Well, you know, I have written things of late. Sometimes, you know how you get this sort of snow blindness when you want to be done of an article? I've sent some and then had to send the next day, you know, I didn't fix this little typo. Actually, I've done that more and more. So I think I'm becoming more optimally imperfect in that sense.
Yeah, that's good.
My wife says I was imperfect, much better than that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the broad themes in the book, some of the big authors in the book. Before we get in, there's a question from the audience. Ryan Lee, who's a big SFL activist, Students for Liberty kind of guy, he wants to know, he wants to just cut to the chase. What's your favorite libertarian quotation of all time? Like, there's 5,000 in the book. What's the best of all?
Oh my God. You know, Ryan, that is a question that doesn't seem to compute. I can remember as a kid, people would say, what's your favorite movie, or your top 5 this, or your bucket list? And it's like, I never thought about it that way. If you give me a second, I bet I can find one.
Okay, go for it.
Right? How about this one from Albert Camus? Not exactly a famous libertarian.
No, indeed.
Liberty ultimately seems to me, for societies and for individuals, the supreme good that governs all others.
Wow, that goes great. That's
and somebody who was in the Communist Party for a while. Because remember, he won the Nobel Prize for Literature. In fact, one thing that surprised me about some of these things is how many literature types you come across, or poets. You know, you look at Henry David Thoreau, right? You look at, you know, I have a list of them. I think I had 4 poets in here.
Wow.
There was Thoreau, and why am I blanking on who they are? Walt Whitman, Ralph Waldo Emerson, regular writers like James Fenimore Cooper. They're all in the book because while we think of them as poets or something else, they also wrote prose. And it's pretty amazing how libertarian their prose was in this stuff. So Walt Whitman, before he was a poet, he was a teenager. He worked for he worked as a newspaper, and one of the things he did is he wrote editorials. Right, he was very Jeffersonian and so forth. So I mean, you find these prose works. James Fenimore Cooper, you know, the Last of the Mohicans, all that stuff. He wrote one book that was very constitutionally oriented, basically about civics, what a good American did, and how it was tied to, you know, the rule of law and negative rights and so forth. So I was struck by that. I was struck by some of the earlier stuff. I mean, I knew who John Milton was. I never read most of his stuff. Well, I've learned more. So Jeff Tucker once said, you know, it seems like I'd read everything. I think that comment came from he and I talking about this stuff. Because to find out what their best quotes are, you got to read virtually everything. And, you know, there's some things I need to do more with Herbert Spencer. Okay. I was looking back over it, and because he wrote so much and so much was good, I didn't have access to every book. And so if I was to go back, I'd do more Herbert Spencer. St. John Tucker of the early constitutional era. He was the first constitutional scholar, you'd say, in the United States.
Wow.
You know, but it's hard to find them pithy that are short. One of the things that triggered this was my second book, or no, my first book on Leonard Read. Well, Leonard reads almost 30 books when I'm going through this stuff. The book I did, I put together his longest sustained arguments. That's what the book was. Well, Leonard Reads is in this book with his shorter, pithy arguments that are, you know, 2 lines long. So it was his use of quotations all over the place that really inspired me to, so maybe I should start putting this stuff together in a more coherent way so people can use it. And in fact, there was a quote.
Lay it on us.
Why, he said, this is about why he used so many quotes. He says, most individuals do not have available to them such resources as are available to us. So why not share the wisdom of seers, those that have seen what most of us have not, the freedom aspirants. So that's sort of it. It was the first book work that I think made me see how many of those quotations were there. And, you know, it was a poet, was the second most frequently cited. I actually went through and counted how frequently he cited various people. You know, he's got, I don't know, 60, 70 times he cites Burke, right? And he talks about, it's like I've learned so much from this. And it was partly because having written so many short articles, especially, you know how people can pull a quote out of the blue and tweak it and play with it and make it mean almost anything.
Right.
Well, if you have a quote in response, they can basically dismiss it as the same. That's not representative, taken out of context. Well, you have 50 or 60 internally consistent quotes from an author, and then you compare them to these other people.
Mm-hmm.
You're not alone. I mean, in some sense, as a libertarian, you often feel like you're alone. I have these weird thoughts. I don't belong with any group I know. I've had so many people say, I've never met a professor like you before, or something like that. So it gives you the sense that, I'm part of a pretty, elite, in some sense, a pretty proud crowd of people who understand the English. And it's amazing how consistent it is. Now, us libertarians may disagree over a few things. So, for instance, in the Rand stuff, I thought of, by the way, putting her under a real name, Alyssa Rosenbaum, but nobody would know who that was. So, but I mean, I focused on what she wrote about liberty and freedom. I didn't talk about the religion angle. I didn't talk about the minarchism versus anarchism stuff. And I'm on her side in the minarchism argument, but I'm definitely not on her side in the religion argument. But she said some great things that she understood about liberty. I think it was because she was so cussed that she wouldn't be intimidated to back down from stating her position. And I in some ways, that would probably be hard to be around, but it means you can state your position in a non-shy way, shall we say.
Yeah, it makes her quotable, that she doesn't have to spend extra words trying to avoid you.
Yeah. Although, there's other issues. I just wrote one since that book, an article about Rand and her use of the word altruism. Which causes all sorts of trouble, because what happened is she used the meaning of altruism that came from the guy who created the word. But common usage moved on and basically equated it with benevolence. So she says all these horrible things about altruism, which is correct if you're talking about what it originally meant. But she wasn't talking about current usage. So she confused me for 20 years on this till I started researching it. So, it's like, I mean, there's some things that are off-putting because I think she intentionally used non-traditional meanings for things.
Right.
And, but that sort of, for many years, kept me from reading a lot of her stuff.
So hang on, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but this is a testament to your erudition here. What is the original meaning of altruism that Ayn Rand is almost secretly referring to all the time?
Well, the person who created it, a French philosopher, it basically meant under all circumstances, you have to sacrifice yourself for others. Benevolence, I do for others, that at every margin of choice, you're required to sacrifice for the good of others. Yeah, because then what's the point of, liberty is to make the most of your individual gifts, however you want to view that. Well, if you're a libertarian and they take that total self-sacrifice, I mean, that's completely at odds with the libertarian view. So she picked that originally, and his name was Auguste Comte, C-O-M-T-E. And he was even connected to Kant in many ways. And my son, when he took his Kant class in college, he said Kant ruined everything. So, I mean, you dig this because you see these things, it doesn't make sense. This statement doesn't match what I think that word means. And so, because what I've often been doing is extending part of the faulty premises book, is a lot of my research now, words and phrases, check your privilege, or calling this, so that I didn't get into the book yet, and that was one of the things. It's this, what do you mean by altruism? And, is altruism the opposite of libertarianism? I think you can't have I think you can't have morality unless you have the choice. If you, Mike Reed, have to sacrifice every time to somebody else, right, and you do anything less than the maximum you could, then you fail. Well, what is the point of your existence then? Other than to be completely sacrificed and given over to others? Well, isn't there an inconsistency there? You can't sacrifice yourself at all times for me. At the same time, I'm sacrificing myself at all times to you. And Kant was a crackpot. He actually created a religion of humanity with prayers and things like that to basically substitute for religion that you have to give everything to humanity and so forth. So, I mean, if you read some of the other stuff, this guy was a nut in that place.
Okay, I want to take a minute to look at the book itself. So I'm going to show everybody what the book actually looks like here. I'm going to screen share it to you. I've got, hang on a second here. Where's my book? There it is. I'm going to screen share it to you in just a moment here so everybody can see what the interior of Lines of Liberty really looks like. There it is. So here we are. This is Lines of Liberty. This is a new book. This great cover. Gary Galles came up with the idea for the cover. Just the quotes kind of faded in the background, and then our designer worked with it. So I want to show you the extent of the book. So it's organized in 4 big sections: the sort of pre-American founding, the founders themselves, then the decline from revolution to progressivism. The maintenance from revolution to progressivism, and then the progressive regression at the end. But I mean, that looks fairly compact, but I want to show you guys. I'm going to click here. You can open up. So here's the 11 chapters, and here we got Cato's letters, Cicero, Adam
read
Smith.
Cato's letters.
Yeah, read Cato's letters. I'll go to that. Tell everybody. Read the Cato's letters, John Trenchard and Robert Gordon. And every one of these sections has another one of these, like 20 different pieces. So they're nicely organized in such a way that you can see how each thinker connects to the others. Bastiat, John Bright, Edmund Burke, but it's also like quite extensive here.
Yeah, actually, and I had to put everything in alphabetical order, because if I had to choose who was most important in one of those sections,
Ooh.
I would never be able to do it. So alphabetical order, so I wouldn't get assassinated by people who had particular favorites that I'd put in the wrong.
Right. Or I mean, if you, especially it reminds me of your response to Ryan's question a moment ago. If you're not really thinking in terms of perfect favorites, you're collecting a body of the most important ones.
Well, I think you're thinking about something and something strikes you that there's an insight there that's well. And I've always been a geek, and my kids have explained to me, but I've become more of a geek in that I have gotten an almost visceral ability to enjoy a well-made argument or a well-turned phrase. It's like way more than when I was a kid. It's like, that's good. I mean, written as many words as I have, and you go, that's well written. I mean, it's like the kids in my classroom look at me like, what's wrong with you? But they do that a lot, so that's it.
But it's an acquired taste, but one of the most enjoyable.
It is. I have enjoyed acquiring it, but my eyes complain.
But yet sparkle with the many revelations to which you are privy.
Well, that's true. As a professor, most depending on the class, obviously, but a lot of time I'm just a storyteller. I've learned so many stories to illustrate this, that, or the other thing, and it's kind of odd in that when I'm talking in class, I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. I'm thinking about what I'm saying next. And so in class, you get interrupted, and you deal with whatever the issue was, and it's like, I have no recollection of where I was.
I know where I'm going next.
So I have to ask my students, where was I? I wasn't listening.
Yeah. I want to go, this Ayn Rand topic is turning out to be quite fruitful, because I realize that within the book, one of the big themes is the relationship between liberty and virtue more broadly. And so this Ayn Rand angle on her special meaning of altruism, I think, is a helpful opener for us there. Can you talk about that theme in all of these 5,000 quotations?
Well, it's not in all of them, but
right.
Well, think of the criticisms libertarians get. You are selfish. Mm-hmm. All these criticisms. You're not doing for others what I think you should. So you get all this criticism as if the freedom to make human choices is immoral, or amoral at best, right? So you get all this criticism, but the fact is, if you don't have the freedom to choose, is morality even possible? If you can't choose what to do with your time and resources, can you do anything that's morally, good? If you have no power, and what is the state? I'm taking away from you the power to make choices with your own time, resources, commitments, and I'm going to make them on your behalf. Mm-hmm. Haven't they taken away your ability to be moral? Right. So, that was something that Rand would have really argued. The only way to be moral is to be human, in Karl Hess's term, is to have the liberty to make the choices and live with the consequences. In fact, you mentioned that. There's a great quote from Rand. I wonder if I can just find which page this on. It's on the morality one. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Right. So instead of being criticized that it's immoral, liberty and markets, she wrote, individual rights are the means of subordinating society to moral law, the banishment of physical force from human relationships. Because what if you take the Machiavellian view, you have a different rule for governments than individuals. If you're an individual and you killed somebody, you're bad. If the government kills somebody because you're at war and you whatever, it's different. So the Machiavellian approach is governments cannot be held to the same moral standards as individuals.
Right.
Well, what is Rand saying, except that's not true? Right? Individual rights are the only way to keep society from violating morality. If they can't steal from you, they can't coerce you, then society is being held to that standard.
Right.
By the way, that first quote on the Rand page,
oh yeah,
that is like a part of the response to Comte's argument about altruism, right? Because what is the purpose of your existence? Well, in Comte, it's to sacrifice for others. Mm-hmm. You as an individual have no purpose, no moral meaning other than sacrificing for somebody else. Well, you're an animal. You know, you match Aristotle's definition of a slave, which is an animate tool, right? A slave is a tool. You just happen to be alive.
Yeah.
So,
wow. I notice also that there's another implicit rejection there. I don't know if this is Ayn Rand's point, but that the attempt to sacrifice oneself for others is actually a less effective means of helping other people more broadly than pursuing your own interests within a free market framework.
Yeah. Well, in that, how do we know where to judge the line between what I should do for me, what I should do for my kids, what I should do for my charities, whatever it is, right? That's an individual choice, and you learn from doing it. If I have all those choices taken from me, how do I ever develop it? As I tell my students, turning things over to the government is to take a decision away from someone who knows more and cares more and give it to somebody who knows less and cares less. When are we use of resources when you take away the crucial things that only we can do? I mean, think of the Hayekian view, right? The use of knowledge in society. It's the details only individuals know, right? Some of which are tacit. That is what we use to create so much of value in society. And if you move towards central planning, what do? You throw away the details, which means you throw away the wealth that they would have been created.
Yeah. So Bruce Kerber is an author, frequently writes on Liberty.me. He's got a series of books out as well. He has a question here that relates to this. He says that the claim "you are selfish," that the often made objection to libertarians, can be diffused by saying "I am subjective." And he asks, what's Ayn Rand's relationship with subjectivism?
Well, it's the only values there are subjective within an individual. So if you take the individual perspective, there is no group value if you didn't buy into it in some sense, right? If there's subjective values, it's like, I think the easiest way of saying what it's not. If a bottle of water had the objective value of $1, right? So that's worth $1, and we all agreed on that. Well, what would happen if you and I traded the bottle of water? Something worth $1 simply moved from me to you. No wealth was created. Well, the problem is, would such trades take place? Right? Because people think the trades are exchanges of equal values. Well, if they were really equal values, we would never go to the effort to trade them because there's no wealth created. It's because we have different values that wealth is created. Right? So, I mean, what if you don't recognize that wealth creation through trade? Then you don't realize that all the government restrictions on trade destroy wealth. And if there's one thing economists, well, not necessarily those at MIT perhaps, agree on, it is that voluntary arrangements create wealth. So why is it we don't like taxes? Because it wipes out trades and wipes out wealth. Why don't we like tariffs and quotas and, you know, government enforced monopolies and price controls? Every one of them has the same result. It wipes out voluntary arrangements and the wealth and growth and all the things that go with it. So I mean, that's really, in that sense, I tell them economists early on, were basically preachers for the general welfare. Who stood up and said, I'm in favor of all the wealth created by people doing what they want? Those were economists. I mean, the early economists, why did they attack mercantilism and protectionism? It destroys wealth. What was the wealth of nations? It's specialization and exchange, right? Those sorts of things that, when you do it, you teach this for 30, 40 years, you realize how powerful those ideas are. But I also realize one of the advantages of the left. Say I don't know, I've probably written 15 different articles about the minimum wage.
Right.
I'm bored. I've thought of every interesting idea. I'm tired. Well, what happens is they just keep coming back and back and back. At some point, we all get tired of talking about it because it makes no difference. It's like they wear us down.
Yeah, in some ways, especially when you think about the Hayekian virtues of the market, it's so difficult to condense those into a slogan. Like what would the bumper sticker say? You don't know how great capitalism is. No one does.
Well, you have to remember, capitalism was not invented by the term was not created by somebody who was a fan.
Yes.
It was by somebody who wanted to make it appear that the only winners were the owners of capital.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what Marx was doing. Why? Because what did he want the workers to do? Rise up and throw off your oppressors. Well, stealing's wrong. So don't you have to demonize the people you're going to steal from? So you have a theory that says capitalists stole it from you in the first place. So it's not wrong. It's just taking back what's rightfully yours. It's the ultimate moral thing. Well, in fact, capitalists are probably the smallest gainers from capitalism. What makes you more productive? All those tools that have evolved over the years were created by capitalists who basically earned, by and large, a normal rate of return for those efforts, and you got rich as a result. If you look at a growth chapter in a textbook, up through about 1800, it's just this little almost horizontal line. Per capita, real GDP is, and then it goes, well, that was the ideas that led to capitalism, the respect for private property and the Industrial Revolution that went with that, because you're on the cusp of that. And it's like people today, they think you have to explain why people are poor. The entire history of mankind, people have been poor. That does not require explanation. What requires explanation is how did some people find a way to not be poor in a pretty spectacular way?
Yeah, I mean, hugely spectacular, especially if you take not just something like GDP per capita, but also our ability to sustain a much larger capita, a much larger population of humans.
Well, that's one of the things I know in one of the chapters of my public policy, faulty premises, faulty policies book.
Okay.
Is that argument that it's this dog eat dog, evil competition. Well, if that's odd, why do we have 6 times as many people with much higher real GDP if it's such a bad thing? I don't see people eating each other in that sort of
Let me take this. This is an appropriate
DC.
Cannibalists. This is an appropriate moment. I want to show people that book too. Here's Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies. This is Gary Gallows' first book for Liberty.me. This book and Lines of Liberty, they're both free to you because you're a Liberty.me member. So here's Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies. Do you happen to know where that section is that you were talking about, Gary?
It is in the section on it's in the second section.
Okay.
Which is about misunderstanding the nature of markets versus governments. And it's probably in the first or second. Yeah, it's chapter 1.
Okay. Great.
We even got a Rothbard quote there.
The free market economy they charge is the rule of the jungle, where survival of the fittest is the law. Libertarians who advocate a free market are therefore called social Darwinists who wish to exterminate the weak for the benefit of the strong.
Yes. That article is one of my favorites in that one because so many of the things, the mud thrown at libertarians in liberty, right? If you bother to slow down and think through those things, every one of them is at its heart unsustainable. Right? And then so a lot of what my stuff has been sort of tires me out some is, they're making these arguments. Well, let's look at the logic. If this is true, then what happens? So for instance, in the law of the jungle kind of rhetoric,
right,
people act like, okay, there's something to eat and either Mike or I is going to get it, right? So we do anything it takes to win in that game. as if the competition that matters is the competition for consumption. I consume what you don't. What they don't realize in markets, the main competition is the competition in production to get the resources so that I can consume. And in that competition, I make you better off as the way to making me better off. Well, I mean, so basically what they've done is let's ignore production. Let's as if there's no production. And we're just fighting over it. Well, there's something wrong with that view of the world in terms of what actually happens.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It just says, let's ignore production. And especially let's ignore the value of tools and of innovation in production. If we consider production, it's only the sweat of the working man's brow.
Well, because most of that starts with the inherited capital stock without ever explaining how that capital stock came to be that large and that form. And then that's probably why, a lot of the Hayekian stuff about production never caught on. If we're not used to thinking about the process by which capital is actually created, then we're not going to be interested in these weird time structure where this is the factory, and this is the factory that makes the parts for the factory, and this is the factory that makes the parts for the factory that makes the parts for the factory. Well, but that structural is crucial, right? Because if you have, for instance, in today's market, artificially low interest rates for a long period, well, then you build, the fifth stage back, right? You're making that and so forth, and then you stop, and you have this huge set of investments that are set ready for the wrong world that then pops up. In fact, there was an article, I think it was at Mises, might have been at FEE, about the Austrian view of overinvestment in education. Because interest rates have been so low, the cost of getting donations, because you have appreciated capital, gets a special deal. The cost of building buildings is very low, so there's huge investment in universities. But what are they teaching you in most of those universities? Right? You're investing in stuff that's worthless in many ways. They should read my books instead.
That's right. Well, indeed they do, right? Faulty Premises is used in one of your classes, right? It's one of the textbooks.
I've used it both in a UCLA class and a couple Pepperdine classes. So
okay.
And part of the reason I use it is I make them not write long papers, because I learned pretty early on that most long papers for students who don't know enough to write it till the week before it's due, right, are 22 pages of bullshit and 3 pages of analysis. So I make them write short papers, like an op-ed, but I have them give me the citations and stuff separately, and I make them write it in 750 words, because that's where it takes skill. It's like, who was it? There was Blaise Pascal, who once in a letter apologized to the person getting the letter. He says, "I'm sorry the letter is so long, I didn't have time to make it shorter." Well, for them to try and figure out what is the key incentive story or stories, say it succinctly, find an argument, and to do it in 750 words is very hard.
Yeah.
And I know how hard it is from my experience, so I use that in part to show them how to structure and do those kind of things.
Yeah. I want to go back. Pardon me?
They still roll their eyes sometimes.
I want to go for a moment to the economic question. I mean, Lines of Liberty is very much focused on liberty itself, but I mean, so much of the case for liberty has been done economically. I know Adam Smith's in the book. What do you think is sort of the best contribution that's recorded in Lines of Liberty that comes from the economic side for the defense of liberty?
Well, I really think that economics, which derived from moral philosophy, right? The strongest case really goes back to moral philosophy, in the sense that you're trying to explain what is the mechanism by which people who may not know each other, may not care about each other, how can we cooperate, right? The question, but that's what economics turns out to be. Most of free market economics is if we have these private property arrangements that derive from self-ownership, and you only have the night watchman state, right, just to make sure the property rights are enforced, what is that? That is what the system would look like if people were making their own choices that they viewed were moral in their own viewpoint. All you have to say is you can't hurt one another. In fact, if you look at the Wealth of Nations, there's a section where it looks like it reflects on his writing about astronomy. Because this is where you have this big move towards a system that works, right? Instead of having, you know, all these epicycles and all this stuff from, you know, go back to this bad, you know, geocentric world, and he comes up with a theory that explains all this stuff, this one way of understanding. In the universal law of gravitation, all of this fits. Well, what was he looking for? What can explain how society fits together? Right? That's the invisible hand, right? You aren't told what to do. You choose what to do, but as long as you can't harm anybody, you can't coerce them, you can't violate their ownership of themselves, what's left is ways to look for ways to benefit others to benefit you. Right? I mean, I ask my students, which world would you live in? A world where you can get what you want by looking to hurt other people, or a world where you get what you want by looking to help other people? Which world would you rather live in? You know, the one that's the cage fight from, you know, World Wrestling, whatever, Federation of Enterprises, or the one where people actually compete in production to find ways to make you better off? I pick the other one.
Yeah, me too. I like to say we compete to see who can be the best cooperator.
I'm right on board with you on that one. You know, but I mean, when you look at it, you got to be careful though with the word best. Right? Because that's an absolute advantage kind of idea. And you want to be careful to do the comparative advantage. Don't worry, there's another chapter in Faulty Premises about that one.
Okay, good.
It was for the last Olympics. Because people tend to think of, in the Olympics, you run 1/100th of a second faster than me. You're the winner and I'm the first loser, the runner-up. So people have this view that competition, all the rewards go to the winner, or you hear this winner-take-all society. They have to understand, and what's rewarded there is the absolute advantage. You're a little bit better than me, and you get these huge rewards. But that's not the point of competition in markets. The process of you and I competing makes us run faster, which benefits the people who are watching. Well, you and I competing to make more money make us discover better ways of doing it, which makes the customers better off, right? So people focus on the guy who wins the gold medal is the winner. No, the main winner is that you do whatever it is better than you would have done it before, and we all gain from that.
Right.
Or for income redistribution, I tell my students, ignore the rich people. Ask, do you care about other people? Well, if I let you get richer, you're going to do more for others that make them wealthier, right? So ignoring you, what happens? I'm for that stuff. But when I pay attention to you, then it's all this, you know, politics of envy. Oh, you're rich, you didn't deserve it, I don't like you, or whatever, you know, it's the 1%, whatever the insult is.
Yeah.
Ignore those people and say, I only want to benefit everybody else. And you know what? You get very libertarian results. You treat them very well.
Huh. Okay, let's do Adam Smith again for a moment, because you referred to the invisible hand, and then it occurred to me that that's an example of a quote that's really taken on a life of its own, because it's become the central metaphor that people use to refer to it, but it only shows up once in the book, right?
Yes, but you notice it shows up dead center in the book.
Okay.
There's actually an article I wrote, I think read last year or so, where, yeah, you can see from where it's placed that it's actually far more important than the one quote. And it does reflect his work on astronomy. He gave lectures on astronomy. And this discovery of a system that shows you how this interaction works, the mechanism works. Not how the individual works, but that makes, we're looking, we're at the era of Darwin, you know, we're thinking about these things and stuff. So there's what one principle, you know, you got the law of universal gravitation, explains where the planets are, you know, all this and that, all these things are explained in one grand theory. So it's what's that one core theory that brings it all together, right? And it was basically the idea that when we voluntarily coordinate our behavior, our self-interest leads us to act as if we care about others, whether we do or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the moralists criticize. Well, wouldn't it be better if you did things for others because you were trying to do things for others? But is that really what would happen? If you, the main thing you do is you wouldn't do for others. They're looking at false alternatives.
Yeah, mostly your average human cares for about like a dozen other humans. His kid, his like best friend, his mom, that's it.
Well, Paul Hain, in his book at Liberty Fund, he was a teacher at the University of Washington, had a very interesting view of a lot of the stuff. He makes a point, as do have few economists like Philip Wickstein and others, that really, if you look at side like biblical ethics and trying to pull out of the Bible what's going on for this stuff, he says there was no such thing as an economy. Right? Most people didn't travel more than 5 miles from their home in their lives. They knew everybody. There was very little travel. There was very little commerce. Well, yeah, if somebody shows up, why did you have hospitality rules that were so strict? There were no hotels. If you didn't take them in, you didn't feed them, they starved or they slept outside. But he said, you can't go from this small, intimate world where you have sort of stable situations and you know everybody to a world of billions of people. You can't possibly know them. You can't care about people you can't know. How do we benefit from those billions of people for whom it's impossible to know? Because if you say, I have to care about everybody else all the time, and you're sort of back in Kant, basically what you do is you destroy all the things you actually do for others.
Yeah. And so often I find that when people attempt to do good things for others, what they're really doing is attempting to make themselves feel like they're a nice person. Like the main objective is really self-esteem management.
Well, there's a lot of that, and part of that belongs to Kant, because Kant says all you're responsible is you meant well, because ultimately you can't know for sure what the results will be. And I think Kant got that wrong. Right? It's true in a sense, right? The only thing that you ultimately control is your intentions. Let's say you're a politician. Do you promise me to intend well, or do you promise me that you know how to accomplish good? You're not telling me you intend. What you're campaigning for is, I know how to do well. And that's the problem. Then you're back at that information problem. I can't know enough. It's an overwhelming amount of information. It's impossible to do. I mean, that's why we talk so much about the law of unintended consequences, right? Those are almost all people who intend well. Well, almost, right? Almost. Says, I want to be the supervillain even though I get the best lines. Most people intend well. Well, how do we get such crap out there? Bad theory plus good intentions almost always gives you bad results.
Yeah. Good intentions do not produce results, or intentions are not enough.
So you can go back to Kant and say, well, I feel good because I meant well. Well, you know what? Where's the negative feedback here? If you intended to do well and you failed, you got to think as well. So you basically, what Kant missed is you can control through logic and looking at the world and casual empiricism even whether it worked. And you're supposed to learn. So if you never look to see if it worked, you never learn. I know Tom Sowell has written about this. The remarkable lack of interest of people on the left in actually looking at policies and whether they work. I mean, almost my entire book about faulty premises, faulty policies is something they wouldn't care about. So it doesn't work in every place we ever look. I felt good doing it with your money. And I really felt like picking Mike Reed's pocket and paying it to do good.
Yeah, and furthermore, I made the voters feel like they were participating in something good because I did something loud about doing something that I thought was good.
Yeah, well, and then you get into another part of the faulty premises stuff is the misleading language. Like we, yes, we can. Well, you know what we means in politics is not me, right? Because when you say we can do it, it's the one who pays for it is always somebody who's not part of the we. So I talk about language issues like how you manipulate the word we and need, and must and justice are all those weasel words that are designed to mislead you. Well, if all you want to do is feel good, you're not going to think carefully enough to see through those things. If you care about the results, it takes more work. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the Kant problem is, you can reason to whether something will work. And if you're proposing a policy that can't work on the surface, well, Obamacare can't work on the surface. It's blatantly obvious why it can't work. right? Because you're basically destroying wealth all over the place. You're covering it over with redistribution and lies, right? And if they fall apart, you can actually, well, or Tom Woods or, somebody else will write a book. The fact is, every place you look, it is a house of cards with nothing there. And it happens over and over and over. But that does make me depressed sometimes. I mean, how much of my writing has been this idea that so-and-so threw out as a great idea doesn't work because of A, B, C, D. You go through it. And it's a lot of work to rebut things. And as I tell them in class, why do you think you get so much crap in politics? If you're explaining, you're losing. The cost of me making an alleged benefit from something is virtually zero. I mean, I tell you tell me a policy, I can crank out 10 allegedly benefits from that. It takes me like 3 seconds, right? Well, how long does it take to have a balanced response? You have to take each of those 10 stupid things in turn. You have to take it seriously. You have to think about it. Is this an empirical issue? Is this a logical issue? And you have to go through and find a way to say it. By the time you're done, they're off to do some new thing, right? So by the time you rebut the one stupidity, by the time you get done with political correctness, then you're fighting microaggressions. In fact, I just wrote an article about that, and at the end I have a thing about what I call my almost alliterative alphabet of politically correct terms, because almost every word you use in a little kid's book triggers somebody's feelings. A is for apple. Well, what about Eve's role in the Garden of Eden? Oh, that makes somebody feel bad. So you can't use A is for apple, and B is for ball as sexual connotation. I come up with an almost alliterative alphabet that you could use that would pass the muster. The problem is, I say, even if we did this though, and we solve all those microaggressions, it wouldn't solve the problem because soon we'd have to deal with nanoaggressions. Littler than microaggressions.
There's a recent piece by David Horowitz about how our emphasis on microaggressions is a sign of how little real aggression is left, how much progress has been made in the last 100 years.
Except to enforce the power of the microaggression to shut you down. Right. So yeah, you wouldn't worry if you're starving to death. You don't worry about whether you got a nick on your toenail. You don't worry about that. But what they're doing is, it's like when I was working on this, mind your what's the term? Privileges.
Check your privilege. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Every one of those people who says that is asking for special privileges because you are part of some evil group that did this 3,000 years ago or whatever, right? You, right, have to treat me better than others. You have to accommodate what I feel as true, not laugh at it, not disagree with me. So they are asking for special treatment. They're asking for special privileges, right, in the name of saying, don't take your privileges from me.
Gary, I've got to get close to wrapping it up, but first we have something that came through Twitter from Corey Massimino, and we've got another question from Bruce Kerber I want to get at from the immediate audience. We asked earlier today on Twitter, like, what are the greatest libertarian quotations of all time? And here's a great one that came in from Corey Massimino, another Students for Liberty, I don't know if he wants me to say bigwig, but Corey could say activist. That'll make him happy. So this one is from Bob Higgs that Corey dug up for us. And it says, it never stops pissing me off that millions of petty crooks, not to mention genuinely innocent people, are sent to prison, while the greatest criminals on the planet not only escape such punishment, but on the contrary are hailed as great men and women and loaded down with honors and loot.
Yes, well, I agree that is an excellent quote, but my book only deals with dead people. So, some people, someday maybe Mike Reed will be in there.
Well, yeah, hopefully both I and Bob Higgs have a long time to wait before we make it into the book.
Well, he has some great stuff. The Crisis in Leviathan stuff seems to explain it a lot. And yeah, I like his work, but we'll tell him not to die on my behalf. But when he does, we'll work up.
Yeah, definitely the next, the 2050 edition of Lines of Liberty is going to definitely need some Bob Higgs in it. Also, Bruce asks about the invisible hand. He says, "Isn't the invisible hand the equilibrium power inherent in the economy?" Is that accurate, Bob? Accurate, Gary?
Well, I don't know if you got an answer from Bob too. It is. It is, I'm not sure equilibrium is the word I would use. Okay. It is the equilibrating mechanism. I look for ways, it's like the Hayekian thing or Mises. What triggers action is a sense of unease, discomfort, something that I don't like about my current situation that I look to improve, right? So that process of looking to improve things is the process that brings you and me together. If I'm a seller and I'm unable to sell as much as I'd like at that current price, I get a choice. I can continue to not sell as much as I want, or I can think, how could I make people like it better? You know, whether it's cutting the price, promoting it a different way, doing whatever. So it's the equilibrating process. The problem with equilibrium is then you end up in these general equilibrium models and, you know, perfectly competitive models that hides all of the process. And Hayek, you know, written about not just the use of knowledge in society, but Economics and Knowledge, his book is about how, and the Austrian view, oh, that's my home phone. The Austrian view is the process, what happens when you're out of equilibrium. The equilibrating process says how that makes us better coordinated. But there's no implication that we actually get to some equilibrium. And in fact, I'm going to do an industrial organization class in the fall, and that's a huge issue, right? You miss all the process of competition in the theory of competition, which is kind of stupid when you think about it, right? There is no competition, no rivalry in perfect competition. Because you're a price taker, I'm a price taker, it just all magically happens. Well, how useful is that to evaluate rivalry? A model that has no rivalry possible is kind of a bad way to evaluate the world.
But again, it's more difficult to talk about the real reality than it is to talk about simplified, distorting versions.
Well, but I think you have to find a distorting version model that is like Hayek would talk about an evenly rotating economy or
right.
Well, it's unrealistic construct because it allows you to say, what if we're different in some way? So I think you have to separate out the model from saying there's this general tendency and then saying, but there's all these other things. So it's like when you do the supply and demand stuff in principles. I say, notice there's only one variable here you can compete with, is price. We have lumped every form of competition as if it's a price change. Well, it's not. It makes a difference. Is this a quality change? Am I giving you free delivery? Is it 90 days, same as cash? Those don't have exactly the same characteristics. Well, we've ignored those real world mechanisms because we've been so focused on, here, see this neat little supply and demand intersection? I do that in class. I show the intersection. I do the standard. This maximizes the welfare gains. And say, okay, go show that to a plumber, and will you convince them? Well, they have to buy the model before they buy into the conclusions of the model. You ask them a different question. If you and I voluntarily traded, are you richer or poorer? Everybody can figure out they're richer. QED, quad. We've got our proof right there.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I've really enjoyed exchanging words with you over the last hour, Gary, with you and with everybody in the audience. It's been a lot of fun. The way I like to wrap up a show is I start by giving people a few links to great other stuff by Gary Galles. I'm going to give people the links to
your show's that way. I like
that. Then number two, I give them links to a couple other things on liberty.me, and then I'll turn it back over to you to give the last word. So you might maybe you want to pick like another great quotation to close.
Okay, I'll shop.
Okay, good. Great Gary Galles. One of the main sources for Gary Galles is the new Mises blog, Mises Wire, here, mises.org/blog. Just pop that link in the feed. Here are the two books, which are for you because you're a liberty.me member. Lines of Liberty, that's the new one, Great Libertarian Quotations. It is the biggest and best libertarian quote book on the planet. Then we've got Faulty Premises and Faulty Policies, which has a nice intersection with Lines of Liberty here. So those are three great sources of Gary Galles stuff. I also want to tell you guys about two things on liberty.me. One is we've got Rothbard University live streaming starting next week. So Rothbard University is Mises Canada's answer to Mises United States Mises University. And Rothbard University They run it in Toronto, and it's a great big event, and people fly in there to go. But if you're like me and you're not planning on flying to Toronto anytime soon, or it seems like it's too far away in the frozen north, Liberty.me members get the stream just because you're members. So here is where you can go to catch the opening ceremonies on Wednesday night at 6:30 Eastern Time. It opens with introductions, and then there's a talk by the one and only Walter Block on Austrianism and libertarianism. The show, shall I say, the Rothbard University events carry on for the next 3 days, and we've got all of those on Liberty.me live stream. Finally, I want to tell you guys about one other book in the Liberty.me library. It's Bit by Bit. This is Jeffrey Tucker's newest book. It is a lot of fun, and I think, again, when we get to the 2050 edition of Great Libertarian Quotations, we're going to have to include some from that, too.
Okay, you ready for the quote?
Lay it on me.
I was having a hard time deciding. I narrowed it down to Bastiat and Hayek. I think well, which would you pick? Would you?
Why don't you do both of them, and then I can decide.
Okay. The quote from Bastiat is, "There are two principles in which there can be no compromise: liberty and coercion." And then Hayek says, I think I tend to lean actually towards the Hayek one if I had to pick between these. "A society that does not recognize that each individual has values of his own, which he is entitled to follow, can have no respect for the dignity of the individual and cannot really know freedom."
Yeah, those are both beautiful. I have to admit, I tend toward the Hayek. I like all of Bastiat's stuff, but Hayek always has a special place in my heart.
Well, me too. But he did get 3 times as many words in that quote. So his was a little
true.
longer.
That's a problem with Hayek. He can't stop talking. You know what I mean? It's something to do with something. Jeffrey Tucker once wrote an article about this, that the reason Hayek's writing is like that is because he's writing about these kind of emergent, loopy processes.
Yeah, and he wrote about a lot of different things. I mean, the Constitution of Liberty is way different than, a lot of his other things on knowledge. And I like both of those things. I tend to like his stuff a lot. I don't think I teach a single course that doesn't have a Hayek article in it.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your new book and your evening with us, Dr. Galles. I hope you're going to have just a great time, and I hope we get to see you again soon.
Okay, well, do I have to write a whole nother book before I get to see you again?
We'll find another occasion sooner than that, I think.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike, and all who are watching. I appreciate the time.
Great. Have a great night, Gary.
Good night. Marcia? Marcia? I can't not have that whole I didn't think of that. Yeah, we'll take care of you soon, your matter. See? Thank you. And I'm sorry it inconvenienced you so much there. Where's the thing? Well, you moved it somewhere so it would be in the picture probably. I would have come up and not found it. So what do I do here to leave?
Okay. Hold on.
Just the X? Oh,
You
so I
just
had to
go
go
out
to
of
the
this.
top.
Yeah, and see how the light there, when you get out of here, it stays on. See, how do I turn it off? It's still on. Hold on. What turns it on? Because see, there's no on-off switch. And
You
it
just
stays
have to
plugged
unplug
in.
it.
No, it stays plugged in.
Even when you had it in the bag, you had it plugged in?
But the light wasn't on.
I don't know why. Sure there's no on-off switch?
No, it doesn't do it. So you heard well enough. Did you ever adjust the volume?
No, it was great. I had no problem with it.
And they never said anything. That's so weird. Why is this not? Oh,
Still,
is it still?
I don't
He's
know
still
why.
on.
No. Well, I go find more stuff. I'd put things together. Jeff Tucker was a great supporter in that. A lot of those ended up at the Mises Daily articles and so forth over the years. So I mean, I was getting some positive feedback as we go.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but I was copy editing the Mises Daily at that time, and so I remember these Gary Galley's quotations coming in.
Well, I'm glad I was giving you work back then. Isn't that what a politician would say? I was creating jobs. If I would have written even more words, would you have earned more? Is that what you're saying?
With more typos.
Yeah.
That was the problem, Gary. You didn't have enough typos for me.
Okay. Well, I have written things of late. Sometimes, you know how you get this sort of snow blindness when you want to be done of an article? I've sent some and then had to send the next day, I didn't fix this little typo. Actually, I've done that more and more. So I think I'm becoming more optimally imperfect in that sense.
Yeah, that's good.
My wife says I was imperfect, much, much better than that.
Yeah. So I want to talk about some of the broad themes in the book, some of the big authors in the book. Before we get in, there's a question from the audience. Ryan Lee, who's a big SFL activist, Students for Liberty kind of guy, he wants to just cut to the chase. What's your favorite libertarian quotation of all time? Like, there's 5,000 in the book. What's the best of all?
Oh my God. Ryan, that is a question that doesn't seem to compute. I can remember as a kid, people would say, what's your favorite movie? Or your top 5 this, or your bucket list. And it's like, I never thought about it that way. If you give me a second, I bet I can find one.
Okay, go for it.
Right? How about this one from Albert Camus? Not exactly a famous libertarian.
No, indeed.
Liberty ultimately seems to me, for societies and for individuals, the supreme good that governs all others.
Wow, that goes great. That's
somebody who was in the Communist
great.
Party for a while. I used to write so many articles for the Orange County Register.
Right.
Freedom Newspapers is a pretty good match for me. That this was before everything's online.
Mm-hmm.
They would send me tear sheets every day of their op-ed and editorial pages, right? So I would have copies and I could see what they were writing about. And in a little blurb, Percy Hoyles, the publisher of the Orange County Register, the original publisher, had a collection of quotes. And so he had this little bitty quote somewhere in that. And every once in a while, one that would inspire me, I would cut out and put it in my top desk drawer. So I've been doing that for years. So I thought, got to be in there, So I went through the Superfund site that is my desk, and I made this little pile of all the things that I had stuck in my drawer over the years. I mean, it was a couple hundred of these little pieces of paper I cut out, ranging in color from, pretty new newsprint to the orangish brown that must be 5 years old. And in that pile were 5 copies of the George Washington quote that I had saved at different times.
And do you think at each time you had thought, oh, this is a great one, I better store it? Like,
I put it in there. I hadn't remembered, because there's enough time in between. I hadn't remembered that I had that one. So anyway, I had this pile of quotes, and I thought, I wonder how many of these great quotes about liberty are not in these books. Well, I actually put together an article for the Orange County Register in March of '99 that was made up of these, what I call orphans. These articles, these quotes I thought were great with regard to liberty and weren't in any of the quotation books I had. So that was the initial, trigger. And then I got interested in this. And I think for the 4th of July, I did one about various founding fathers, one from each. Even got that one published in the LA Times when they weren't quite so reflexively left-wing. Haven't had one in the Times for a while. But so that's what got me started. Right, I found this interesting. I was learning stuff, and so at the time I mentioned I started with Thomas Jefferson because there was a natural connection there. and it would wind here and there, and I would read stuff. And so I was working on these things, and I would get the books and I would read. What I gained a lot from going through this, from people you would have thought of to people I had never heard of before I started this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and there's that range in there. I mean, Ayn Rand is in there, Thomas Jefferson, the other famous founders, but then there's other lesser-known figures.
Yeah, well, the one that has struck me the most, and in fact, I believe is the longest chapter in the book, is the first one about somebody, is from something called Cato's Letters. It was written in England by this pair of people, and it was the leading libertarian voice in the English-speaking world before the revolution. There's a, for instance, the Liberty Fund has a 2-volume collection. Wow. I mean, it's like 1,200 pages long, and it was great. I even found quotes that I see things from the founding fathers that people will speak well of. They're kind of paraphrasing what went before. So, you know, I mean, I find Cato's Letters was really an impressive thing. Right. In fact, I was going to mention about the quote that led me to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so I mean, the story of how this book really started. I was writing an article in 1999, so this goes back to there, and I was looking to use a quote from George Washington, right? Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. I don't remember exactly. Like fire, it is a dangerous service and a fearful master. That's actually almost a paraphrase of something Trenchard and Gordon said, you know, 80 years earlier.
Wow. But we give the later guy who was just paraphrasing, give him all the credit.
Because nobody reads. I mean, this is great stuff. In fact, in getting ready for this, I collected, I don't know, a dozen of the things, short, pithy things they said that, you know, people were interested in what they had to say. It's worth reading. There's even a financial bubble in the writings. The South bubble, it was going on at the time. But anyway, the George Washington thing, I tried to look it up. I didn't remember the quote exactly. So I went to my quotation books. You know, there's Bartlett's, there's, you know, these quotation books.
Right.
I couldn't find it. Wasn't there. So I'm going, well, I want to use this quote. It's perfect. But I don't remember it exactly. So what I did was a fun.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Liberty.me Live. I'm your host tonight, Mike Reed, and this evening we're here with Gary Galles. Gary is a professor at Pepperdine University, and he's also a prolific Liberty author. You see him all around the Liberty space, especially the Mises blog. The new Mises blog has a lot of Gary Galles. He's also the author of 2 books that are exclusive to Liberty.me members, Faulty Premises, Faulty Policies, and the new one, Lines of Liberty, which is, as far as I know, the biggest, the best book of libertarian quotations known to man. Gary, thank you so much for joining us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I thank you for those kind words. And all the 108,000 words or so of the book, thank you too for those.
Yeah, it's not a lightweight, that book. But before we jump into it, just tell me, did you just return from a lengthy vacation in which you didn't do any writing?
Well, yes and no. I was gone for 2 weeks. I had written things before we left and sent them off to do stuff. So, for instance, tomorrow I have something in the San Francisco Chronicle.
Oh, nice.
And I thought, sometimes I am most productive when I can't write, because then ideas sit there and cogitate. So I got stuff to do. I also took a copy of a book that I think maybe 45 years ago I'd read as a kid, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Wow, great one.
A very libertarian book, and I reread it. And in there, I was working on an article about watch your privileges. Mm. And I found a quote in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress that is perfect for that article. So yes, I enjoyed that stuff. I tend to read a lot of science fiction. I avoid dystopian stuff because I can live in that world. But yeah, so I thought a little bit, didn't write much.
Yeah, well, but even when you're supposed to be on vacation, the brain is still going on that stuff.
Well, my daughter was just talking to me earlier today, and she said, well, Dad, you know, when you're on vacation, you're really working. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But it's an avocation. It's not really work.
Yeah.
You know, I've learned so much stuff in what became Lines of Liberty. It's a great personal education device to go through that.
Right.
Of course, it does take a decade and a half, but, you know, detail.
So this is a collection of quotations. There are what's the number? 61 different authors inside of it.
I just counted. We were 69.
69 different authors inside of it, and each one has dozens of different quotations. I don't know how many that adds up to in the whole thing, but you got to be pushing 1,000 quotes by the end of the book.
Oh, 1,000. I'd probably say there's probably 5, 6, 7,000 quotes all told.
Just amazing. Just amazing.
And, you know, it's something I'm not sure I would recommend for anybody to go through the process. This was something that I started to get interested in slowly over time. As I'm doing other things, I'm working on this stuff, and I'd read this author and they connect to one another, and some of them are interesting. You know, when I started, I mean, I might tell you the story about how I got started. One of the most obvious people to look at was Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
Well, coming up on the 4th of July, it's a natural time, but he also has my birthday. So the advantage I have over him is I'm 210 years younger and alive. But then, you know, it turns out I come across in reading that, what was it? Richard Henry Lee criticized him for plagiarism from Locke in the 2nd paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. So I start looking into Richard Henry Lee, and so the Richard Henry Lee's in there, and Richard Henry Lee is saying he stole it from Lord Acton.
Wow.
Start reading Lord Acton, and you sort of, this is a pretty promiscuous group here. You know, these people will tie this, and so it's like my education as I slowly would read these things with an eye towards this stuff. So I've really